Hi, I'm Emily Remington with CPA.com. I'm the Director of Audit Product Management, and today I'm joined with Danielle Supkis Cheek. It's wonderful to have you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, now I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
Of course. So I am currently the VP Head of Analytics and AI at Caseware. I've recently joined Caseware and I'm so happy to be here. My background is in pure audit and assurance, and I transformed that kind of background into forensic accounting and then into data analytics. I also teach data analytics at Rice University and sit on a variety of different standard setting and advisory bodies, including the Technology Experts Group for IESMA, the International Ethics Body, and the IT Task Forces for PEAK, the Professional Ethics Executive Committee, and ASAC, the Assurance Services Executive Committee.
Well, it's wonderful to be here with you, and I could probably pick your brain about several topics from accounting theory to innovation and AI, which is what I'm focused on today. But you are very well respected by me and several others. So let's talk a little bit about transformation, the audit, and let's start with innovation. So specifically, tell me a little bit about your thoughts and perspective as it relates to innovation today and innovation looking forward around data analytics and AI.
Yeah, so it's such a broad topic. It's hard to pick one area that it's really worth the focus, but it's one of my favorite topics. I think the piece that I want to focus on the most is kind of what does it mean from a firm transformation standpoint? Mm-hmm. Firms have to deal with change management in a way that they've never dealt with before. Firms don't necessarily always understand how good they are at change management. So a lot of us have to deal with changing standards and regulations on the regular, at least once a year, if not more frequently than that. But it's always been within our processes, and our constructs have already existed to deal with the changing standards and how to comply with them. Things like CPE and education associated with the, almost annual update that a lot of us get for whatever the new rules are. When you start to talk about firm transformation and process and the use of data analytics or AI in your practice, now you're starting to think about, how do I change my process? And that's a very foreign concept to a lot of firms because change management is hard. It's not like it's an easy, turn it on overnight and then have it work. And so thinking about in a very kind of metacognition way and rethinking of how do I design processes now that certain technologies are available to me, and how do I make it so that I can have a high quality as well as a highly efficient process behind the scenes. And I see technology as a tool that helps enable a particular process and not necessarily technology for the sake of technology. Mm-hmm. The technology needs to serve the professional in the practice, not just be some cool tech for the sake of cool tech. That's not going to ever fly in our profession.
Mm-hmm. And that's so true. What you mentioned is as CPAs, we're used to not only dealing with change, but helping guide our clients through change. So it is. But then once we get into kind of, the foreignness of AI, then people get, a little bit more trepidatious around that. So can you tell me a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of AI within the profession and what that looks like, how people are using it, and what that landscape is like?
Yeah, so AI is such a broad topic as well. There's many different types of technology in AI. Right now, clearly the hot topic is generative AI. And I think a lot of firms are starting to get pretty comfortable with the ability to use a basic, almost chatbot-like experience to improve long form content that they have to create. So employee reviews, improve your email work. I'm terrible at copy editing my own work. I read over words all the time. I'm a numbers person. I'm not necessarily a words person. It's been a great experience to say, please copy edit this for me and improve my communication skills. So I think those table stakes use cases are mostly commonplace for a lot of organizations and individuals right now, especially when you're not looking at confidential information in those prompts. As you go up into, hey, I want to create more efficiency, you're having to look, how do I make sure I mitigate any risk of leakage of confidential information? Because there's stiff, high penalties for having a leak, not just in the public reputation, but for the world of standards and ethics. So you can't have confidential information leaks. And so that becomes the next progression of use cases of how can I make engagements in my day-to-day work, not just my basic communications, more efficient. And I think the really next path forward and frontier is how do I improve my ability to work with the data and records that I have access to. Because generative AI is usually pretty good at summarizing long-form text. Accountants necessarily, I'm sure there's a lot of accountants that are really good readers out there. I'm, again, the super dyslexic, really good with numbers and really not great at reading long-form documents. If I was good at that, I would have gone to law school, and I didn't. So taking those long-form documents, summarizing, extracting the key terms, starting to move into a world of unstructured data, turning into structured data on a mass scale, I think that's when you're going to start seeing the pivot point where it goes beyond, okay, either some people still perceive it as a cool parlor trick of like improving my communications. I still think communication improvement is a really solid use case for mainstream professionals. The expectation of solid communications is still so high. So I think that's the progression you're going to see, that kind of basic communications, then more fit for purpose engagement features and functionalities, and then into that more getting structured data out of unstructured data.
And also with the data conversation, we see, that linked now in a very transparent way to audit quality. So I know you've spoken specifically about data analytics and kind of your take on use cases around data analytics, specifically when we looking at client data and doing procedures to maybe alleviate substantive procedures. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, and even like your vision of that? I know you've mentioned the ice cream shop, which I loved that. I loved hearing about that.
So the concept is, I don't know if I'd use the word alleviate. Maybe, everybody likes to have their favorite vessel, fill up the cup, fill up the bucket, whatever assurance vessel that people like to think of at some point I need to get to reasonable assurance. What is that line? That's up to the professional judgment to get to what is reasonable, yes? But how do we get there is what I think is going to change in the future because of data analytics. But data analytics, when you're just sitting there and using data to scope and do better risk assessment or better sample selections, that is valuable information that creates time savings for an engagement. You better tailor your nature, time, and extent of procedures back to risk at hand, and you design a more efficient audit, which in my personal opinion, a more efficient audit does create quality, because quality is inherently linked to efficiency because you're focusing on what matters. But to me, that's the first step. That's not the end step. The expectation of the public is growing for us. There's been some, public failures that the regulators have made a very public statement that we're going to protect the public interest. And of course, we should protect the public interest. That's what we do. That's what our ethical expectations are. That's why we exist as a profession. So we're going to be aligned with that. And as the standards have a higher expectation of what is possible with the world of technology, I think there's going to be situations where I don't even know if I can get enough coverage through traditional means because the workload would be so high. So even if I improve sample selections, I'm still going to have such a large population that I need to test, or a large selection that I need to test out of a population to get that coverage. It's just going to be inefficient. So how can I create more broad, applicable, substantive assurance through the analytical procedure themselves? So the example you like so much is that if I'm able to build out a relationship where let's go with an ice cream shop because everybody loves a good ice cream shop. And I find that ice cream shop per location revenue varies with precipitation level, which is usually what people typically find from an operational standpoint. And I'm able to get third-party data that is the precipitation level by zip code for all the different locations that a client has ice cream shops in. And I can start building out relationships. I've now started building out kind of two different sources of data that can never be manipulated the same way. And I'm improving the audit quality evidence of that third-party data or other source data or just different angles. And so as I'm starting to able to create relationships in ways that we historically haven't easily been able to do, but many times management is already doing, can we start to take a decent amount of assurance value? I don't think we're ever going to lose the need to vouch things, but we might be able to start the audit in the future where we don't have to go from, the trial balance to the GL to the subledger down to vouching, but we start at all the documentation level and roll that back up. And if we're able to create enough automation and efficiency through analytics, those kinds of things start to become very possible, create that efficiency, as well as give us a faster filling up of the assurance cup. So hopefully creating, like a really streamlined audit process.
Yeah, I love the idea of that. One of the things you mentioned too is that I want to touch on, like you said, it's correlations and parallels that our clients are already making. So it's kind of connecting those dots and now doing it from the audit lens. But one of the things you mentioned is ethics, and I know that you sit in several positions where you have to think through those issues. So can you share a little bit about some of the considerations as we move deeper into this world of innovation and AI and data analytics, and really the landscape of technology is also changing. Just some of the implications and things that we should be thinking about within the profession and for firms around ethics?
Yeah, it's such a great question, so timely, especially when you start to look at all the third-party regulation outside of the profession associated with AI as well. And so for me, AI will change how we execute some of our ethical obligations. It does not absolve us of our ethical obligations. And because most of the ethical standards have been written in a very principle-based way, and if you think about AI as a digital assistant, I actually don't approve of the term co-pilot. I realize there are products named out there, co-pilot, which is fine. People can name their product whatever they like, but I don't like to consider AI as a co-pilot because it implies peer. And AI is always going to be subordinate to the human professional that is supervising that technology and oversighting that technology. And the technical term for it's called human in the loop. So if the human is always in control, then it's never a co-pilot because it's not my peer, it's my subordinate. And if it's my subordinate, we already have a really robust framework of how to supervise the work of others. We've never gotten into our staff's head and had them do their work while in an MRI machine so we can see through of what exactly steps they're taking, but we have a heavy review of their outputs. So if we start to think about AI in a similar way of, I need to take responsibility for output. How do I make sure I can do that and come up with the approaches to that? I think you'll start to find that AI becomes not that scary. The how may change, who we need to do certain aspects, but there are ways, even in a situation where you don't have a full glass box and you have something called black box, which implies a lack of transparency, there are ways to test that. And there's even new engagement types coming out of auditors that are going to audit these approaches and how to understand what are the inputs, how does that impact the outputs, even when you don't fully understand the process in between, because we've never understood the human mind. We're not as reviewers of work. And so if you make those kinds of parallels, it's like, okay, I get it. I still have all my ethical responsibilities. I now just need to change slightly the how to execute to be able to take responsibility for that output.
And when you phrase it like that, it doesn't seem so overwhelming. It's we've had, people that we've always had that within our standards and the framework of, proper supervision and review. And as you mentioned, I love that concept that it's, not necessarily a co-pilot because that does infer a level of peer. So I think that's a very important point.
So we use digital assistant. We're big on the term digital assistant.
Yes, a super smart digital assistant. Yes, I love that. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything just from your experience and kind of the discussions that you've had that you'd like to leave with the group?
To me, it's more about the kind of exciting time and the change in the profession. If you think about the last major change, it was probably the post-Enron world of heavy internal controls and the move to risk-based auditing. And now we're changing not necessarily much of methodology, but how we can execute certain things. And I think we're going to be in a position where we look back at this pivot point, we're like, oh man, the ways of approaches and the really manual ways that we used to do before of that kind of longingness of what it used to be in memory, but also don't know if I'd ever want to have to do it that manual before, because now I'm able to do so much more with less and help hopefully be part of the solution to some of the staffing shortages that I know some people are going into. And so I think it's going to be some really interesting times as everybody figures out exactly what is the landscape, what is their comfort level with technology, how much do they want to change their approaches versus not, and at the speed of which they want to change. And I think it's going to be each firm or each professional is going to have more choices of the how to do things, because there's going to be more options out in the marketplace. And so it's also going to kind of be a democratization aspect where it's not necessarily only the big firms that have access to this kind of stuff. Smaller firms and solos are going to have access to this as well. And sometimes maybe even a more cost-effective way because of how pricing and licensing works. So I think it's going to be a really exciting time to see who gets to choose what adventure in a really varied way, but not in a sense that any way is necessarily wrong. It's going to be slightly different for whatever is your value and whatever your pain points are.
Yes, lots of opportunity.
Indeed.
Yes. Well, it's a pleasure to have you today. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.